Next, we will look at some of the empirical evidence. This evidence comes from a relationship between the share of new products in sales and a percentage change in employment, which is calculated by CIS2 CIEIP innovation database for 4 countries, that is France, Italy, Netherlands and the UK. And what they find is that there is no dramatic job losses with respect to the information and communication technology. Note that this data is for 94 and 96, and in the traditional sector there has been dramatic job losses as such. So one can understand it with respect to the points we have highlighted, that there might be a job creations in certain areas and there might be job destructions in the another area, and what the trade-off and how the final impact will play out, one has to be very careful and then understand in those layered by layer as well. When we talk about the direct effect at a firm level, which we find is that there might be an ambiguous relationship as such. A company coming up with a newer product may also end up expanding more. With the expansion, it will happen that it might be now demanding more of a labor. But since it will be giving up, let us say, if not completely in the short run, at least over a long run period, then the demand for labor may actually go down. But here also, like we have said earlier, the relationship in a short run and long run can be different. As the result, what we find that the overall impact, when you want to understand in terms of very let us say technology intensive firms and how whether they are recruiting more or not, you may find that the research studies find an ambiguous relationship. And what is clearly missing is an inter-firm effect as such. Here you also understand that it is possible that some of the firms are now becoming more innovative. They are maybe, with their newer products are able to maybe capture most of the market share. That means if they are becoming too big and begin to enjoy monopoly power, it can have an impact on the other firms. We have already understood that R&D and patenting are very important choices, strategic choices which the company can influence that can have impact on their monopoly power as such. So what is the impact on their competitors, rivals and the other firms within the industry is also not being very well captured as such. One more important point is with respect to industry. Now suppose an innovation happens in one sector, and what we realize that the new machinery or equipment this particular sector is going to introduce has an impact on the efficiency of the other industry. So we are talking about maybe like a machine tool industry or an industrial engineering firm which is coming up with the better products which are intermediate products and are used by the other companies for their own production. So then there also the demand which will be now created in this industry of the new labor will depend upon the overall demand growth that will happen in the product or the place where the machines are being used and how the product market is behaving in that particular area. If this new equipment is reducing the cost for them, and the companies also shift or transfer the reduction in the price to the consumer, and there is a dynamism in growth, you will find that this industry will also pick up. Clearly, once we move from a industry, then another level. Now, suppose we are talking about the impact of an industrial, let us say, innovation on agriculture, on service sector, then clearly we have to understand the overall impact on that economy level as such. So these are some of the points one has to be very careful while looking at the relationship between innovation and employment. But what does the theory suggest? How do we perceive this as if we want to conduct an economic analysis of the relationship between this innovation and employment? By now you've already understood that the relationship is not very straightforward. It is not that you will look at maybe a technology adoption or capital intensive technique being used in a firm and then how whether they are demanding labor or not, because the overall impact of any technological change first of all will be realized in a longer run, and one also has to understand it more from a other sectors that are also going to be influenced by that. So you require a more complete, a more macroeconomic kind of a perspective when we are talking about this relationship between innovation and employment. The idea here is that there will be a direct effect. An adoption of a capital intensive technique by a firm has an impact on the demand of the labor by that particular firm. At the same time, there is an indirect effect because of the growth dynamism in the market demand. Again, maybe they would scale up, they may increase their production capabilities. Then what happens? So apart from that, when we're talking about innovation in one sector being absorbed in the other sector, then what happens? If suppose now employment is going down in one sector, we've already seen a case of a video parlor and CD parlors vis-a-vis the OTT platform, and now increased demand in the other sector. So there is a requirement that all such perspective could be integrated, right? So there is a need that the direct effect on the one hand and the indirect effects, they need to bring together, they need to be integrated. So in that context, we find this particular discussion on compensation mechanism and how the way they may or may not operate in a particular economy. So what is this compensation mechanism as such? So essentially you will find that there are those people who will talk about the positive effect of the innovation on employment. Not only that, they will talk about that economic system has the capability and a built-in mechanism to kind of ensure the job recovery. Okay, if there is any kind of a disruption in the jobs happen because of the innovation, then economic structure would have the so-called built-in mechanism through which the absorption will happen, vis-a-vis the critics who will point out that no, that is not the case. There are limitations of this, and efforts and the may be required, and particularly the possibilities that happens, the possibilities that occur because of the technological change and the unemployment that comes into picture, it may not be as easy to absorb without any such specific effort. So what you do is, whenever you want to understand this particular relationship, you bring together both both of these perspectives and try and understand that. So what is being done? They have identified different mechanisms. Say for example, if the innovation leads to decrease in price, if the innovation is about new machinery, if an innovation is about the new investment, if it leads to decrease in wages. So what are the positives on one hand and what could be the negative? What could be the offsetting factors that can come into play? It will become clear as we understand each of them in detail. Say for example, if there is a decrease in the price, we are talking about a process innovation which leads to reduction in the price of the product. So clearly there will be an increasing competitiveness of the particular firm nationally as well internationally. It is likely to offset the losses in the job that may happen. But when we say this, we are somewhere assuming that the demand is kind of a constant, it will not be affected. Moreover, the company will be transferring the reduction in the price to the consumer, and they do not have any oligopolistic power. If they have any kind of an oligopolistic power, then that means they would be able to enjoy that. So they would be able to charge higher price over and above their marginal cost and will be able to enjoy that. The transfer may not happen completely. So when we are now trying to understand this effect or impact of the reduction in the price, we have to pitch all these points together and then overall understand the impact. Say for example, the next case is of a new machinery. Now in a new machinery, it is likely to create jobs in the industry maybe in which the means of production are now being made. However, it may result in overall aggregate job losses because they are more capital intensive techniques. They may not require as much of a labor as might be earlier employed as such. Next, suppose for example, it leads to more investment. Through the innovation, you might have to undertake new investment. So clearly it is likely to increase the profit because of the new investment and increase in the production capacity as well as the jobs as such. But like we said earlier, new investments in what? Capital intensive techniques or in the labor intensive techniques as such. So one is one very typical neoclassical approach which we get is that because of the increase in the capital intensity of the technique, the demand will go up, and as a result the wages fall. When the wages fall, then it is likely to increase the demand of the labor. Now that once again at certain extent assumes that there is a flexibility in the labor market. So you have to be aware of this assumption when somebody says that, okay, maybe because of the reduction in the wages, you will find that there might be a demand increase, and as a result, more labor is now going to be employed. Clearly, that means that there has been a reduction in the labor, wages, which may not happen because of the stickiness of the wages as such. What about via increase in income? So you find that now there's, say for instance, in 90s, we saw that IT boom, lot more people started getting employed in the information technology, their income increased. Now, if their income is increasing, then it is likely to increase in the demand of the overall goods as such. If this overall demand of the goods increases, then that means it will lead to more, demand of the labor as such. However, one has to understand that it may not lead to an aggregate demand increase as such. So that increase via the increase in the demand of labor because of the demand or dynamism which is now witnessed in the other sector because of booms in one sector and increase in income in this sector that is attributed to maybe the technology, it may not be sustainable and it may not be very large as such. So as a result, there might be a limitation to that. What about via new product? So that means new activity, new market, but what about the replacement effect, right? So we have talked about OTT platform vis-a-vis the CDs and video parlor. So clearly introduction of the new product is also likely to have a replacement effect. So what we are trying to do through this compensation mechanism is essentially try to pitch against each other the positives that will come, that the idea that there might be a built-in mechanism in the economy to absorb any kind of a reduction in the labor or reduction in the labor demand, or that may happen because of the new increase in the new technology, vis-a-vis the critiques who will point out that may or may not happen as such. Another important point which is being raised with respect to this relationship between the impact of innovation, technological change and employment is with respect to the quality of the jobs. One thing is very clear that if you look at the literature also, that over a period of a time with the changes in the technology, what we want or require are highly skilled labor. So clearly the quality of jobs that people are doing has rather improved, but that is not limited to in terms of the overall working environment, etc., but also includes the skill level of the labor as such. Now if that happens, clearly the technological change is rather skill biased. If it is skill biased, that means the people who have these capabilities and opportunities to get skilled and have resources to get education and over a period of a time maybe upgrade themselves, they would be rather better off. So the skill biased technical change is clearly something which has been highlighted in the job in this particular relationship, and what has also witnessed that over a period of a time the quality of the labor requirement is also increasing. There are certain few stylized facts which has emerged from the literature, also focusing on the empirical relationship. First of all, it has been pointed out that there is this never-ending race between innovation and employment. That means there is always this tussle which is now being going on, and the rate at which technological innovation and diffusion eliminate jobs vis-a-vis the pace at which the new economic activities are created. So there is this race which is there. On one hand, you will witness that newer opportunities are coming up, new types of jobs are being created, and at the same time, certain economic activities, they keep on getting obsolete, they are no longer required, leading to a major chunk of labor not being employed as such. So one thing is very clear from the literature also, that technological unemployment can happen. People who have been employed earlier, they have become well versed with the earlier techniques, ways of doing things. They may not be able to change, they may not be able to absorb the newer skills as such. And as a result, technological unemployment is not something which is only left to be discussed on the papers. People do experience this and it does happen. And clearly there is a change in the skill bias of employment over a period of a time. People with a better quality education, better quality skills are able to get more opportunities in terms of employment. If that happens, then the wage polarization also exists. The polarization is the difference between the wages of the skilled labor vis-a-vis that of the unskilled. Now what you realize is that the demand for the skilled labor is rising much faster as compared to the demand for the unskilled labor. If that happens, the wage gap that exists, the polarization that exists between the two groups is also going to increase. Moreover, the aggregate demand and macroeconomic conditions are also very important. If you are witnessing technological change in an economy which is rather young and thriving and growing, then with the increase in the overall aggregate demand, some of the negative effects that will be witnessed or which will be realized because of the technological change might be rather easy to absorb as such. Another important point is with respect to innovation interact with trade. Now, whenever we are looking at this relationship between technological change and employment, particularly from empirical point of view, say for instance, you have measured technological change through certain index and employment on the left hand side, then you will realize that there are a lot more variables which will influence this relationship. And one very important relationship is with respect to the trade. So there is an interaction between the trade and technological change, and it is very important for anybody to understand this interaction while making any kind of a statement with respect to the impact of innovation on the employment. Now what does this interaction entail? What does it mean? Now, think from a point of view of a company which becomes very innovative. They've started doing things very efficiently. They have introduced new process innovation, introduced a new product. Now instead of being limited to within their domain, they might also likely to export it to the other countries. So they become more competitive nationally as well as internationally, and then they are doing it. On the other hand, now you understand this vis-a-vis the way of doing for the globalization of production which we saw. Because of the newer technology, because of the ICT, it did become very easy for the firms to offshore their production, and in that case clearly the employment will go down within the economy. In one case you will see that there is going to be a positive effect, on the other hand you will see a negative. But what is for us to understand is the interaction between the. So that means when you see this kind of an overall understanding that there is an existence of the technological unemployment, wage polarization will also increase because of the increase in the quality or a skilled labor as such, then we have to bring in like how do you deal with that. One way to deal with that would be this mediating influence of the national innovation system. So this race which we are talking about, the never ending race of innovation and unemployment or employment, can then be won by skilling, by education. So that is where the role of the national innovation system will come into picture. The labor market conditions, the institutions that are created, the support that has been given for the reskilling, for education, for upgradation is something which is now going to support the employees who may have been left behind because of the technological change, increasing their capability to be able to absorb into the newer jobs as such. So clearly the race between this innovation and employment can then be won by those countries which has a very strong innovation system and also supportive labor market conditions and the institutions. So if you look at it, the major conclusions which we get with respect to this now we've brought in the word automation, because so we will talk more about it, but in the recent times there has been more discussion. So mechanization vis-a-vis the automation. Mechanization, you are talking more from the point of view of maybe creating machines which will still be run by the by labor. On the other hand, automation, you are reducing the time, you are reducing the labor which is required to do that particular work. So in with the automation also, there has been some literature which talks about its major impact on the jobs. Clearly, some evidence which comes into picture is that there is going to be a major reallocation, though may not be permanently eliminate the large number of jobs as such. Employment is likely to fall in some industries, grow in another. Some industry in any case has already a saturated demand, while other may have unmet needs and elastic demand. So clearly the particular markets may still sustain, and the change is also likely to be more disruptive. Certain, again, like learning from the past and what we have already discussed about, certain major policy changes in that case can be talked about. These are also building on our last point from the last slide, where we talked about that how the national innovation system needs to be playing a mediating role. There need to be a supportive labor institutions which will be supporting the labor reskilling as such. So workers switching industries would require new skills, new types of apprenticeship, work study programs, skill certification, MOOCs, lifelong learning, reducing the barriers of the employee mobility across the occupation. So these are some of the ways through which one can deal with the challenges that comes through because of this constant race between the innovation, technological change, and the employment on the other end. So there is two major reports which does talk about this inverse relationship between automation and employment, and they talk about this World Economic Forum report in 2016, which highlighted that automation can actually lead to loss of more than 5.1 million jobs due to disruption in the labor market. And McKinsey reports also point out that almost half of the work activities can potentially be automated using the current technology. Countries like China, India, and the US, over half of the jobs will be automatable. If that is the case, the productivity will be improved clearly, but one has to look into what will happen to the people who will now be left behind. In that context, that what we have talked about earlier, the need for the policy changes becomes very prominent. The need for the creation of a work study program, skill certification, lifelong learning, etc. would be very relevant. Now we come to the Indian case. In the Indian case, we are going to discuss this particular study by Professor Mani, and he has looked at this very interesting data on the operational stock of industrial robots in the world and in India. And he has shown that over a period of a time, this operational stock of robots which are there is increasing in India as well as in globally. China, Korea, US, and Germany in fact account for this 74% of the total sales volume in 2016. If you see that within that metal, electrical, and electronics and automotive sectors are those which has this majority of the stock of almost 80%. So what does it mean to have the stock of industrial robot? That means most of the work in those industries will now also be automated as such, will be done by the robots, not by the labor as such. So what has been found is that when you look at the kind of jobs these robots are doing, they might be generally handling the operation, machine tending, welding, and soldering as such. Coming to India, the study has pointed out that operational stock, it did increase immensely from 70 to 16,000 and at a rate of 44% annually. And there's been this tremendous increase has been witnessed since 2000. Clearly, manufacturing sector is the one in which these robots are mostly employed or used. So 2/3 of this operational stock actually is in the manufacturing sector. Now, within the manufacturing sector, what you realize that it is in the sectors like automotive, electrical and electronic, metal, chemical, rubber, and plastic. So if you look at automotive industry, so you can think of a Hyundai plant which has now 108 robots as such, which are now putting together the different parts of the car, and bringing it a particular in a particular assembly line. They are bringing a car together. So they are doing that, and automotive industry is the one which contributes most to the use of the robots in the Indian context here. And there also, like in the international context, we see that most of the work that these robots are engaged in includes welding, soldering, handling, and machine tending as such. So in that sense, the pattern which we are witnessing in the Indian context are very much similar to what is now being witnessed at the international level. So these are the numbers which has been given in his research, and you find that in the manufacturing, clearly we have seen that it has increased. But what this particular table it shows is that the extent of diffusion of automation is rather limited in India. So if you calculate density per 10,000 employees, clearly we have very less number as compared to maybe other economies as such. And what you find that the very labor intensive industries like paper, wood product, textiles, non-metallic products, food products, they are the ones which are least automated. So the next question comes, if automotive industry is now going for more and more automation, then what impact it will have on the jobs? In order to answer that, Professor Mani has highlighted that automotive industry, if you look at it, it accounts for only 10% of your manufacturing. And robots are also used for less labor intensive tasks within the industry. They are used for tasks which are inhospitable for labor and may also require precision as such. So the conclusion that automation is not currently a very significant threat to the manufacturing employment, but clearly the rapid technological development could change this situation in the future. As a result, the need for the policy on an automation and how to take care of the abundant labor which is then prevailing as such. So if you look at this very important report on future of jobs, and it came in 2023, it does highlight some important points. So what are those? First of all, technology adoption. It is a key driver of the business transformation. I think everyone will agree to that. If that happens, then the largest job creation and destruction, it will also come from various environmental, technology and economic trend. Climate change adaptation and demographic dividend will become important, and the net job creators, because if you look at most of the technologies which we are talking about are essentially talking about the sustainable transition. So what the type of technology which we are now trying to adopt are something which are more sustainable and are going to deal with the challenges of the climate change. So it is expected that in that area there are going to be more job creations. Apart from that, big data, cloud computing and AI features are going to be adopted more. Employers anticipate a structural labor market churn of 23% of jobs in next 5 years. That means the human machine frontier, businesses introducing automation into their operation. It is a bit slower than it was previously anticipated as such. Like I said, employers anticipate a complete structural labor market churn of 23% in the next 5 years. Employers estimate that 44% of the workers' skill will be disrupted in the next 5 years. Hence, the final, you can say, learning is the focus on upskilling and reskilling, and 6 in 10 workers would require such kind of a training before 2027. So with this, we will stop our discussion on innovation and employment. Next, we will talk about innovation and economic growth.